Hi folks, Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about this white supremacy thing. There's pretty much every sort of globalist advocate at all levels, whether it be the United Nations, installed puppets like Joe Biden or the installed puppets in the British government, or even in Australia for that matter. They run around insisting and asserting at every opportunity that the major threat to the world, to all the order, to democracy, to everything, the threat to everything is white fucking supremacy, fucking Nazis. Now, for some reason, there are just no Nazis to be found, so they have to invent it. And the way you invent these white supremacists, these omnipresent Nazis, Hitler is personally everywhere, is that you just expand the definition. So you might say a Nazi is a member of the National Socialist Workers' Party in Germany, but then they'd all be over the age of 120, 130 years old now. So I don't know how formidable you can be at that age, but so do Nazis exist elsewhere? How do they exist? What's the definition? Where are these Nazis? So they have to invent it, and the way you invent Nazis is by expanding the definition, increasing the definition, making the definitions not only more vague, but ever sort of a wider net, cast a wider net. So a Nazi, for example, is parents who go to a school board meeting and complain about graphic sexual literature being given to their 5-year-old children. If you complain about that, you're a fucking Nazi. You're a Nazi. You fucking Nazi. You are Hitler. Now, there are other things, like if you complain about or even question mass migration, the mass migration of brown and black illiterate peasants into the West, and the huge, massive collateral damage that's doing to our nations, our societies, and our employment, capacity to create wealth, and so on. If you complain about that or question it, then you're a fucking Nazi, a white supremacist. So if you complain about affirmative action or race quotas for unqualified,
brown and black people, then that's it. You're a fucking white supremacist. Have you got a problem with giving black people jobs that they're not entitled to and got no qualifications for, and otherwise wouldn't get under any means other than through quota? You got a problem with that? You fucking Nazi white supremacist. And so just keep on expanding. So, well, climate change disproportionately affects black and brown people. So if you're against the climate change message, that means you're against brown and black people. If you're against brown and black people, that makes you a white supremacist fucking Nazi. So just by adding these things on and tagging these little definitions, and as I think I've mentioned, I've been to a bookshop, one of the biggest history bookshops in Australia, and I commented to the guy in the shop, the gay guy in the shop, or white guy, and I said, well, you've replaced that history with all this LGBTQ literature. Now his instant reaction wasn't say, well, yeah, it actually sells quite well, and we made a commercial. His instant reaction was, are you a fucking Nazi? Is Hitler your best friend? That was his instant reaction. So it's by expanding the definition of anybody that's not super woke progressive is a white supremacist. If you're a white supremacist, it means you're a Nazi and you're a fascist. And if you're that means you are therefore Hitler. So this is the insanity of how they're increasing the number of white supremacists, and the false flag operations like that punk kid in Washington who happens to have a very neatly folded, straight out of the bag swastika in the front of his car. That's supposed to be a genuine thing that he. Could you get more of a false flag? I mean, seriously. And then that's laid out for the media to photograph. Oh, fuck. That's the only way they can create Nazis, by just inventing them, because there just ain't any Nazis to go around. I mean, even sort of supposed Nazis that are meant to be in Australia, as an example, and there are people that are depicted as Nazis, and so what's the basis for depicting them as Nazis? And their evasion is known to have books about Hitler or something. Okay, well, it is a huge historical event, and something that's studied in school. So why would somebody not have that? Oh no, the significance is that he's may have a book that's approved by the every educational board and in Australia and that sort of thing. But if he's got it, it means that he is a Nazi, a white supremacist, a fascist. He is Hitler. And so they gin it up through association and invention, inference. Who once made a social media post that questioned the Holocaust, and well, what post is that? Oh, we can't find it now. We don't know. Somebody said that he had coffee with Hitler yesterday, and that so somebody said that he made a Nazi salute once, and that this sort of thing. Well, sure, somebody said. Who said that? Oh, we don't know. So by whisper and innuendo, inference and claim, but no one's pushing back against these claims. So once someone's target is, well, we don't like this guy, then okay, let's call him a Nazi. Now, I've noticed there's a number of sort of protests and so on, and somebody invariably turns up with a Nazi flag that seems to have just been got out of the packet. It's still got all the folds and everything in it. It's brand new. It's clearly never been used before. So they've bought it specifically to go into this march. And strangely, they make sure they file straight past the media posse, so the media can go, look, Nazis, Hitler, it's Hitler. And when in fact that person is a plant, it's a false flag plant. They're there to do that. Now, in another one, this is in Australia, the journalist, you couldn't call him a journalist, activist masquerading a journalist. He said to the people that were complaining about mass migration, and very legitimate complaints and concerns and questions. They are the voting public, they're citizens. But if you question mass migration, then you're fucking Hitler. And that's all there is to it. There's no nuance here. You are fucking Hitler and a Nazi and a white supremacist, and that's how it is. And that's how we're going to present it. So there was a bunch of people, I don't know, 30, 40 people, something like that. So the journalist said, well, everyone's calling you a Nazi, so why don't you give us a big swastika salute? So with any of the journalists says with a big smile, he's being silly and so on. And of course that's photographed and that's flashed around the world. Nazis, there you go. There's the proof. If you want proof, there it is. Nazis, they're everywhere. And so and so then the politicians are coming out. Nazis is unacceptable in our society. Our society, we won't tolerate Nazis. Hitler. And so the whole thing is absurd. It's an absolute absurdity from beginning to end. But not one politician is pushing back against it. There's no public figures that are coming out and going, this whole thing is a fantasy. It's been created. It's been invented. Show me one Nazi, and I'm happy to talk about it. And then prove to me that they're a Nazi. I'm happy to talk about that. Otherwise, shut the fuck up. You're just inventing. You're creating these Nazis. These Nazis are supposedly everywhere, under every bed, in every closet, and floating in every coffee cup and bowl of soup and so on. That's bullshit. Bullshit. There are no Nazis. And the correlation that some may have with Nazis is so slender that as to be absurd. For example, there was a group of people who were practicing, this is in the US, that were training to survive a major sort of Armageddon type event like a cyclone sort of goes through the place and nukes it, or a nuclear strike. So they were training themselves to have bunkers and food and surviving. Now that's all it was. There's nothing else to with that. But the media portrayed it. known to have Nazi sympathies, to have Nazi-style behaviour, to love Hitler. And none of this is true. Of course, it's all invented. It's all done through inference and innuendo and suggestion. Or they'll have a photograph of some of the guys there, and then they'll have a photograph of the swastika. See the swastika there? Look, that means they're Nazi. And of course, that's simply nonsense. Now, this expanding the definition of Nazi, there must be a purpose to it. And I'll come back to that in a minute, because they're putting a lot of time and energy into it. Firstly, I thought it was just to shut people up and say, look, white folks, we know that your standard of living is like a third of what it was 50 years ago in terms of purchasing power of the paycheck. We know that. But if you complain about it, we'll call you Nazis. We'll call you names. We'll call you Nazi, fascist, Hitler, and all that sort of stuff. But the difference, well, there's a pattern here in my view. I remember sort of 25, 30 years ago, rape was something that you had to prove. The burden of proof was on the accuser, because if it was proved that rape was committed, then someone could spend a long time in prison, 15, 20 years, that sort of thing. So the burden of proof, quite reasonably, if you're going to put someone in prison for that long, is the burden of proof is on the accuser. Now, not that the other side doesn't have demanded defence, they do. But now the sort of burden of proof came down to, were you forced to do this? Was there threat of force, credible threat of force, or use of a weapon, like did someone hold a gun to your head, that type of thing? Or were you drugged? And if you were drugged and out of unconscious, how do you know that it took? So there was a decent burden of proof. Now, I remember one case, this was when I wasn't that long out of college, actually, when this guy came, where there was a party where everyone was getting drunk, and everybody was, like a college kid type party. Everyone was getting drunk and taking party drugs and this sort of thing. And it seems everybody was pairing off, and everybody was getting laid and this sort of thing. So it was just one of those. I mean, it was almost an orgy, I guess. But one of the women who turns out to be a very touchy, very precious, feminist type chick, she decides, no, it was rape, and was egged on by the rape industry at the time, which didn't have anywhere near the clout it does today. But so it took it to court, and it was the case. I would suspect, based on what I'd seen, that the pairing off took place, and maybe she kind of came to her senses halfway through and thought, oh no, I don't want to fuck this guy. So I assume something along those lines would have taken place, but that it was rape was a stretch. But she lost the case, because quite reasonably, as a judge, it was an orgy. Everyone was drunk and off their face and taking party drugs. So that you weren't forced into it. No one threatened you. So it's therefore not rape. Now, that's, of course, the law has changed multiple times. Now, the argument back then was, back at the time, 25 years ago, and still today, by the way, is that we're not getting, 100 women are coming forward with rape allegations. No one's looking at these women happen to be radical feminists or lesbians or this or that. So these women are coming forward with rape allegations. And, but out of the 100, we're only getting 10, for example, 10 convictions. Therefore, something must be wrong. So they're not looking at the quality of the complaint. They're just looking at the outcome, which is very globalist, socialist, Marxist sort of woke thing. If the outcomes aren't right, then something must be wrong, further downstream, which is, of course, absurd. The issue is that low quality complaints are being made, typically egged on by activists in cases that shouldn't get up anyway. So the laws have changed about a gazillion times, where they've simply expanded the definition of what constitutes rape, because the quality of the complaint was poor, because this claim of white supremacists everywhere, because the quality of the complaint about rape was poor. They're saying there's a problem because we can't prosecute enough people. We want to prosecute more people.
We want to prosecute anyone we fucking want to prosecute. Now, then split off into two areas in where black, brown people are committing the rape. Then it's typically a slam dunk case. Witnesses, lots of DNA evidence. It's like slam dunk. So these people call plea bargains. We've got you dead to rights. To run. So either we'll give you 5 years if you cop the plea, or if it goes to court and we've got to spend the time and energy on you, you're going to get 12 years. What do you want? You're done either way. There's no way out of this for you. So Leroy takes the 5 years and it's done. But with white stuff, it's different. With the white complaints, it's different. There's very few white guys, some, but in proportion, very few white guys are getting convicted. Now, this is seen as a problem. It must be racism, or it must be Nazis or something. So they want to get this is the middle class straight white boy. That is the scalp they want. That is the one that just so happens to be the biggest obstacle to globalization. So happens to be those people who are least enthusiastic about the globalization project. They just say that those are the people that the rape activists want to get. And so the globalists go, hey, whoa, this is it. We've got the same common enemy here. So we'll help you go after them because that helps us. And so, hey, a good thing all round. So, wow, done and dusted, great deal. So they just expanded the definition of what constituted rape. So in order to nail the white guys, they had to use, technicalities of rape. So it's effectively unwanted sex, where it's rape if she didn't give proper consent. So you fall across the line with the technical legal interpretation of consent. So if you can prove in a court based on these expanded definitions that the woman didn't give fully, what's referred to as fully informed consent, and there's all sorts of escape routes for her to take, none for him, but for her there is. So she can say, well, I had 2.5 drinks instead of 2, say glasses of wine or something. So I had 2.5 drinks. So that means legally, on these technical interpretations, I can't give consent. So if I had sex after having had 2.5 glasses of wine, that any consent I gave is not legally legitimate. It is therefore rape. I have therefore been raped. And so given those technicalities, and these are the technicalities they're dragging straight white middle class boys into court on, and saying, well, she didn't give consent, or she gave consent, but her consent wasn't legal, therefore it's rape. So these are the sort of things that are going on now. And I think they're doing the same thing with white supremacy. I think they're expanding the definition and using, technical interpretations of vague laws or vague, laws, let's call it, a technical interpretation of vague laws. So they've got an easy case to drag someone into court and say, well, he's a white supremacist. Well, what did he do to be white supremacist? Well, he was, he went to a school board meeting, complained about sexual, he complained about drag queen story hour. So that makes him a white supremacist. So by expanding that definition, they can accuse anyone of being a white supremacist and then drag them into court. No, he complained about, or he said he didn't think abortion clinics are a good idea, white supremacist, and so on and so forth. So they can really use a vast array, like the January 6th thing. It's an insurrection, directly attacking the elected officers, holders of the land, those fucking Nazis, and they can do that with no. They almost don't have to meet a standard of proof. They can just assert it and drag someone into court. Then, as soon as the white supremacy or the rape or any ideological crime is invoked, then the burden of proof is reversed. Now, what are they going to do with this expansion of, everyone's a white supremacist, Nazi, fascist, Hitler, and so on? They're doing it for a purpose. I mean, what do they do? Does it become, at some critical election, do they decide, no, this election's void, we didn't get the outcome we want? You know why it's void? It's because of all those fucking Nazis. And so they're going to use this in some way to crush any opposition to what they want.
And that's really, and so really, what point are they going to use it? I mean, they're using it now, but they'll want to use it decisively in the event things don't go their way. So I would imagine an election time or something equivalent would be the way, or do we? We're not accepting the judgment of the Supreme Court because they're Nazis, like that white supremacist. That's sort of really, I think, where we're going here, and I think it's going to get ugly. You've been with Taskless today, your Pushback Channel, and thank you for listening.